Shut your mouth when you're
Nope.
talking to me.
I refuse. I'm not looking at OBS right now, so I can't do that.
I have confirmed that the recording is happening on all
You have
platforms.
confirmed.
The backup and the main. I have confirmation.
We have confirmation.
All right, we're going to take a little break here. I want to tell you about something pretty amazing that we stumbled upon. A little ways back, we interviewed this amazing dude, Kwame Bowen, and he shared with me after the episode that his mother is a poet. And what's awesome about that is that he has all of her writings and all her poems, but what he doesn't have is her reading them. That inspired Keith and I to then start recording videos for our daughters.
And as we started recording those videos, we started running into the challenges of where are we going to send them to our daughters? How are we going to get them to them? Where are we going to save them? Is it going to be Google Drive? Is it going to be OneDrive? And then along came GiftPod. It's an audio memory that you can record and give as a private podcast. What they're going to do is edit, add music, and produce the audio that you provide them into a professional podcast that you can share with your family members for any purpose. We use it for our daughters in the future.
All right, so check it out. In the write-up for this podcast, you're going to see a link to GiftPod. If you use promo code MIC10, you're going to get a discount. And leave some amazing memories for your friends, family, loved ones, maybe for yourself. Why don't you time capsule this for yourself? I don't know.
So check them out.
giveagiftpod.com.
MIC10 promo.
Welcome back to More in Common. I'm Keith with my co-host Rod, and today we are with Dawn Hicks. Dawn is originally from Richmond, Virginia. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in architectural engineering from the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. She also holds a master's in architecture from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, where she focused on the social and economic impacts of hip-hop on architecture. Dawn has a passion for enhancing urban environments through influences of social, economic, and cultural forces that help shape built environments and develop inclusive communities in affordable ways. Her goal is to use her diverse love for music and design to enhance the future of architecture. Now, she is an Enterprise Rose Fellow, currently working with Venice Community Housing in Venice, California, as their community design coordinator and project manager. With VCH, Dawn serves as a key member of the housing development team as VCH initiates new construction projects focused on increasing affordable and permanent supportive housing options in Venice, as well as reinvest in several older properties. She is also an integral part of their property management, resident services, youth build, and advocacy teams, and engages a wide variety of other community members and stakeholders in an approach to community development and participatory design. Whew, that was probably one of the cleanest reads I've had yet.
You did good.
Welcome to the
you
show.
did good, bro.
Nice.
Welcome
Thank
to the
you.
show.
Thank you.
We're
excited to be here.
Yeah. So first question, I know you've been so nervous about this for 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
I came up with it this morning to make you feel better.
Awesome.
Yeah. And it's actually something that we haven't talked about on our show in 100+ episodes. Now I'm really interested, but I'm going to bring back our prep call. So I'm going to bring our private conversation into this public domain because you said something that intrigued me, and I hope I heard you correctly.
Okay.
But you mentioned gentrification is a necessary evil. I am fascinated by that sentiment.
He came out guns ablaze today.
I know, man. First question.
I mean, we hear, like there's a fairly, I don't even know if there's a binary narrative. There's like a gentrification is bad narrative, but to call it a necessary evil, like, let's get into that. You've got the expert. You are the expert on this. I've never talked to an expert on this, so let's go. What'd you mean?
I don't know if I'm an expert, but
you got some experience though.
I do. I do. We do with my work with BCH, with work in architecture, just and then construction and maintenance, just in general. Just have some experience in it, but I don't know. And some people may disagree with me. People will say gentrification is just all bad. And some people will say gentrification is all good. But the word gentrification in itself is a problem, right? Because it means that
Let's do it. Yes, this is good. Yeah,
you guys are
good.
hilarious.
Start with the word. Start with the word.
Yeah.
Because
we're big fans of proper use of English language. So yeah,
okay,
this is good. Yeah.
We'll use it throughout this conversation.
Okay.
Not really. But the word itself is problematic because it brings in a lot of things that aren't being discussed. You know, a lot of history. It's about people just coming in, property values going up. They want to change the way a neighborhood looks and functions, to bring the property value up. And that's an issue because it's driving people out, people that can't afford to stay there. The folks that are coming in are not really about saving the history behind the community or work a lot in cultural identities. They're not interested in what a neighborhood historically is about, how the community is already operating in that space. And so that's where the problem comes in. And I say that is necessary because there are neighborhoods across the country that have dilapidated buildings, that, have these pockets of emptiness. And so it's good to be able to reimagine what the neighborhood would look like and build up. But the way the gentrification process is happening now is problematic. And I feel like it's just another form of redlining. So historically in Black neighborhoods, there was redlining. There were areas where, Black people couldn't buy houses. They couldn't get mortgages, loans. And so it's another form of separation. And I feel like sometimes gentrification is the same way. And, so if we don't do it correctly, it's necessary, but it's evil because it's pushing out the people that already live there. So I think that's why,
I'm not sure. I have a couple questions and I'm not sure which to ask first. So I'm going to put them out there so we can talk about it.
Yeah.
One of them is how many ways does gentrification happen? I'm aware of like 2 or 3 off the top of my head, but I'm curious, like, what are the ways you've seen it happen? And then the other thing is how much of it being necessary is due to the way that the system currently works. Like public education is funded by property taxes in, I mean, probably most counties. I don't know if it's all, but most counties in the country. So education directly correlates back to wealth. Like it's kind of this loop. How much of that is tied to the necessariness of the evil of gentrification? I don't know.
I like the first question first. Like, how does it show up in different ways? Because like this gets to the point you made about, let's start with the word gentrification and how it looks. Yeah.
Yeah, it shows up many ways. It shows up with building a new arena, for instance, and coming in and taking out homes, right? Taking out homes to build arenas. I'm not saying that's what's happening in Inglewood. I don't know details, so we're not gonna specify. It's just an example. But
Inglewood's interesting because there's 2 examples. Because there's an arena that was already there that got retrofitted, which actually raised property values and stuff that was already there. And then there's another arena that did clear out land and buy people out and other things. So there's 2 different types right there. Yeah.
So my understanding, the stadium was on a racetrack. So
that's right. It was a racetrack.
Horse track. Yes, something like that. One or the other. And they didn't tear down any homes or anything for that.
Right.
But my understanding for the arena, it could be possible, depending on, I don't know, what they're going to do with the forum, but they are talking about a new arena. So let's
I
just
was talking about the forum. So there's another arena proposed. I didn't even realize that.
For the Clippers. Yeah. So I don't know the ins and outs, so I haven't dug deep into that yet, but they have decided to bring the Clippers to Inglewood. So I don't know what that looks like. But when I moved to Inglewood, they were talking about building a new arena, which would have been tearing down some folks' homes. Is the initial plan that I saw. Now I don't know if that's still true or not, but yeah. So that's a form of gentrification. I say a lot. Every time I see a Starbucks come up in a random place in a neighborhood, then you know that area is about to be gentrified. I feel like Starbucks is like the key.
That's the kickoff point.
Key does. Buy now. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. But it comes in many ways. It could come in a school system where I've seen it where they changed the program in the school system. Like they made a school like a magna school versus just a regular public school. That's one way that gentrification comes in, because then that means that folks are more comfortable sending their kids to that school, and so they'll start to buy more property in the neighborhood because they want to send their kids to that school. Yeah.
For everybody else, and rent can't be afforded anymore, and now we gotta keep moving.
Yep. Yeah. So houses that sit for a long time, I've seen developers come in and buy these homes from folks who let it sit and just don't want to do anything with them, don't want to pass them on. They let them sit there. They're empty, vacant, and they look bad. So developers just buy them and then start to sell them for higher prices because they have renovated them. Coming in, building down the street, there's a market rate housing complex that's coming in, but there's going to be a Target at the bottom of it. So doing mixed use buildings is another form of gentrification. So beautifying these areas like a Market Street or in Richmond, it's like Broad Street, right? So it's this long strip of road of buildings, commercial buildings that are, that folks are trying to come in and update and renovate and put in commercial spaces to make this a more active area for folks to go and shop and make this area walkable, right?
What's the order? So I'm going to use Inglewood because I'm somewhat familiar with it. So like the Forum gets redone, the Charger Stadium gets built. So what's the order for the community? Because like I'm guessing rents, retail, commercial, and residential go up, which makes it harder for people who, unless there's a rent control thing, and that's a whole nother conversation. Rents go up, so that starts to push people out, because it's now more desirable and people see business opportunity because there's a stadium, so I can have my goods closer to where there's going to be people, which also home values will start to go up. So like how does the effect happen in a community when say a stadium or mixed use Target, Starbucks, like how does it happen from what you've seen?
I think it varies, right? Depending on what is coming to the neighborhood. And I think that's where the problem comes in, because these developers have these thoughts and ideas already in their mind of what they want to do. Like these things have been planned for years that are coming in the neighborhood. And so you'll see property values start to rise, or you'll see a Starbucks randomly, pop in the neighborhood, and then you're like, wonder why, they're building this random, building in this
Because
area
people
where
in
no
the
one's
back
gonna
are
travel.
already aware of the plans, and like
Oh
things
yeah.
are starting to, and
Oh yeah.
and is the
Yeah.
community, and the community is typically, I'm guessing, not involved in the conversations, or
No, and then those, so that's where I want to be able for my work to come in, because folks have already identified areas that are that need to be developed and need to be built up. They've already been researching and figuring out, if this is a good area where property values can be high. And I mean, you look at the Crenshaw line, that was in the works, I'm sure, for a decade.
easy.
So yeah. So these things, people,
Did
developers,
that
they
get
know
approved?
the Crenshaw, their destination Crenshaw is happening.
Oh,
It's
that's
being,
happening. Oh,
it's
wait,
being
that
built.
one's been happening. There was a new line
Yeah.
proposed. Yeah.
Yeah, that the line of Destination Crenshaw, yeah, that's being built. And it's a great thing for the community. Like, these things are great things for these communities. But I think for me, I question when does the community become aware that these things are happening? And I think that is the evil side of gentrification, because it then to the community, to the neighbors, it seems like it's happening so fast, and so quick, and they don't have the opportunity to ask questions or
Seems like it's
talk through these things.
like unintended repercussions of, maybe intended, I don't know. But like, if you're not including the people that live in the community and know the community, then they can't say, oh wait, putting that there is going to cause this, which is going to be a problem for whomever.
Yes. And a lot of people don't, that you're right. I think a lot of times it is intended, because you don't want to come in and try to have whatever you want to do stopped. Like, you want to be able to come in and say, I'm going to do what I want to do. And so that's when gentrification becomes evil, right? So it's necessary, because this area, I mean, that area of Crenshaw, and again, we're just using this as an example because I have no idea what happened in this process. I don't know. But that, that area of Crenshaw needs it, right? You want it to be beautiful and walkable for the community. You want the community to feel comfortable and to grow, right? You want it to grow. But when you don't have feedback, or if the community isn't informed, how can you build for them? So
right, because at that point it's just a money grab. It's building for you or for whomever's in the circle.
I've always thought of gentrification as a bad thing, but never really looked into it, because I just kind of understood its effect. And if I were to kind of summarize this in a little bit, just for my own mental processing, make sure I'm thinking about this correctly, and then for whoever's watching, essentially, generally speaking, the act of gentrification, or the act of development and building, has a positive veneer to it. It's like, we're going to build this community up. We're going to put a Starbucks. We're going to put a Target. People are going to have easier access to certain things, whatever it might be, food, clothes, all of the
Caffeine.
things that can come with a Target. And then, of course, the wonderful $5 a cup Starbucks, right?
$5
Which is
pumpkin latte.
Great indicator. And this is going to happen typically in lower cost neighborhoods, because real estate is cheap. And like any company or anybody, any developer, they're all looking to buy low and sell high. So that very principle of buying low and selling high, as they come in to drive up property values of the owners, because I imagine a lot of the people that live in these communities, and correct me if I'm wrong, are likely to be renting from somebody, or may own the property which could be of value to them because then they could sell their property for a boatload of money and go do what they want. But the people that are renting now need to keep up with the rising costs of rent because the owner can demand a higher cost unless they're rent controlled. And if they aren't rent controlled, by avoiding having the conversation with the community, you avoid their ability to enter that stipulation to say, yes, we will approve this. But we need rent control because we're not leaving. And the reality of any system in this country, and I will die by this statement, racism always plays a role because there is a fundamental fact of Black neighborhoods being unsafe. And white people don't want to live in unsafe neighborhoods. Therefore, they don't want to live in Black neighborhoods. So there's this, it might not be consciously deliberate by a developer per se. It could be. It likely can't. I mean, there's probably 50-50. But that sentiment, no matter what, just kind of underlies everything that we do, right? And so over time, you look at this veneer of positivity, which, to your point, you have dilapidated buildings, you have areas that could use some cleaning, and we have people willing to invest in it, and that's amazing. But it's not for the benefit of that community. It's a benefit for the future community, which is the evil part.
I just, real quick, what you said, I just wanted to correct what you said, 'cause I know what you meant. You said the fundamental fact, you meant the fundamental perception of fact that Black communities aren't safe.
Yes.
Yes. Not a fundamental fact.
Correct.
Yeah, it's not a fundamental fact that Black communities are not safe. Correct.
But the thing is, white people want to move in these neighborhoods. So historically, and this is the thing that is super important to understand, that these communities are this way because of the systems that have been put in place that have allowed, these neighborhoods to become dilapidated, right? I know in Richmond, there are a buttload of housing projects. And, historically, things like, because of racism, things like trash not being picked up adequately, things like the city not coming to do repairs to their buildings. Historically, this is what happens in Black neighborhoods. So now these neighborhoods are this way, which the world has created, right? Because it's Black people and white people didn't want to live in these neighborhoods. So, but now you have this savior of gentrification that wants to come in and say, oh, we're going to make it better. Well, you created this mess. This is what you created. So now you want to come in and fix it and do all of these things. And then that means pushing the people that live there out because you want to come in and fix it and live there. So that's where the issues of gentrification comes in. And I think that's why people say in these neighborhoods, we don't want gentrification. Like, it's not for us. You're not coming in to fix our problems. And it's not just about housing. It's about, we talked about school systems. It's about the fact that these neighborhoods don't have adequate grocery stores. It's about the fact that we hear this in movies all the time, but it's like super realistic that every corner is a liquor store, right? Or like a 7-Eleven or some convenience store. But what about a bodega that sells fresh fruit? What about some, these local things that could be happening in these neighborhoods that are not? And so when I say gentrification is necessary and should come in, those are the things that we should be talking to these communities about. Do you want a grocery store? Do you want a Starbucks? Because 9 times out of 10, people in these neighborhoods don't want Starbucks, can't afford a Starbucks, wouldn't work at a Starbucks. So why would you build a Starbucks in this neighborhood? You get someone in the neighborhood, right? Because it's not for them. Someone in the neighborhood could make the best coffee. How can you set them up to own their own business in this neighborhood?
Instead of letting Starbucks buy it, and create a system that gives the community an opportunity to build it and run it and operate it themselves rather than making it for somebody else.
Right.
And you had mentioned redlining, and I think one of the nuanced areas is is I've heard some people say, well, now my house is worth more. I can sell it and go take that money and buy another house, which sure. Yeah. I mean, that might be a thing you want to do. Also, because of redlining, it's made it really hard for Black people, specifically Black and brown people in these communities, to take that money and take things like equity loans and put it back into their homes and renovate and do the beautification themselves.
Yep.
Because they can't get the loans, they can't get approved because they're a risky loan or whatever. And so then that just allows corporations and white folk to come in and do that instead of them, where they could have been growing their equity, growing their and beautifying their own community and neighborhood.
Yeah. And so that's also a part of educating folks in these neighborhoods, right? Because they may not know that that's what they should be doing, because all they see is someone coming in and saying, I'm going to give you $1 million for this house that they could have bought for $20,000 30, 40, 50 years ago. And they're like, oh, yeah, I'm out. Let's do this. We actually just had a conversation about this yesterday. I'm going to talk to a guy that I met yesterday further about the work that he's doing. He's an architect in LA doing this kind of work. And how do we start to say, even if that person wants to sell, how do we keep this wealth in the community? Even if that person wants to walk away from their home, okay, then that's fine. We can't get them to stay and keep it in their own family. But how do we keep it in the community? Because at the end of the day, that's really what it's about, growing the community and the folks that live there. So I talk a lot about community land trust. Land trust, they operate in that way of trying to give that wealth back to the community. So it's about buying the land and then the community owns it. Those cool. type of processes, those type of systems to be able to say that we are rebuilding this community the way that we want to see it rebuilt. So yeah, it's a tough situation because it's not just one thing, that has to be fixed also in these neighborhoods. The school systems have to be fixed.
Yeah.
The food intake, the health. These kids have to be healthy to be able, and their parents too have to be healthy to be able. So, teaching them how to cook fresh vegetables, community gardens, it's not just one answer. How do you teach financial wealth to folks that have been renting or have been on Section 8 for most of their lives, right? How do you teach that to them? They deserve to know, just like everyone else, how they can excel in life. So it's all of those things that have to come together to build. So gentrification necessary, but all of these things have to come into play to be able to do it. So it's evil because that's not what's happening. Right?
It's being done for the benefit of the wealthy, not for the benefit of the community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Try and put a bow on it, because we could talk about this all day, I think. You had said in answer to Keith that, there's so many things and it looks different ways. And I think that's why it's hard to That's probably why it's hard to root out as a community, because it can happen. It's happening behind the scenes. It can happen in different ways. There's not a set formula, like watch out for this, then this is going to happen. Like it's just hard to see. And then by the time you see it, it might be done.
Just look out for that Starbucks.
And that actually happened. I think, I was living on the other side of Inglewood, and the way I would get to work was passing, the construction of the stadium. And one day I looked up and it was like this random Starbucks in the middle. Yeah, it just random.
It didn't.
And I'm like, yeah. And it's right across from the stadium now, at this point. So it's almost like there's a Starbucks at every corner almost of the stadium. But yeah, it's just, about when we are going to build something in a neighborhood, we want to immediately talk to before we even acquire the property, we want to talk to the community and say, hey, this is, what we're thinking about. Do you have any thoughts, concerns, things like that? And those are the conversations that are going to need to start happening when you're talking about gentrifying an entire neighborhood.
You mentioned I share this because you might already know it. Have you heard of the book Color of Law? Have you read it?
Yep. I have not gotten all the way through it yet because I actually first started with oh man, what is the name of that? It's another one that talks about, it's gonna come to me.
Okay.
Evicted. Evicted is the book. So I started with that one. It's about folks living in Minneapolis, I think, Minnesota, and their experiences with the inequalities of housing and renting. And so now I'm on the Color of Law. I should have read it a long time ago because clearly this is the work I do, but
I just started it. Our silent partner, who we all know's mother, recommended it to me, and I found I just started it. So I don't have all of it, but what I thought one of the more interesting starts at the beginning was the reference to the impact of World War II on the development of projects and not giving Black people the jobs or the housing that were developed for white people to have the jobs in these manufacturing because they needed the talent and other things. And they built these separate communities, one with fewer resources, fewer things. To your point, you built this and now you want to fix it, but you're not fixing it for me, right? It's the thing that, and oftentimes I'm not trying to explain this to you, but to the audience, it's the
let me explain this to you right quick.
Explaining this to you. It's that very fundamental nature of how systemic racism actually exists. Not
I hate you. I was getting ready to call out like this is racism.
This is what racism is. Like this is. Like I've been on this train lately of making sure that we properly use the words racism, bigot, and prejudice, because so many white people think I'm not a bigot when they hear I'm a racist. But it's like, no, we participate in these systems. Like you should know what they are, or else they will never change. And
exactly. Yeah. And that's where everyone should start. What is the history of this neighborhood? Right. In the part of the book, it's like, how did World War III, World War II, anything impact that specific neighborhood? Even thinking about redlining, how did that impact the neighborhood? What is the history around redlining in this particular space? And you have to understand that first. That's the first thing that you have to realize and understand. And think about, and a lot of times it just gets overlooked because no one wants to talk about systematic inequalities and racism. No one wants to talk about that those things actually happened in these neighborhoods, right? They just want to move forward and move in and live their lives, right? They don't want to know. They don't want to talk about it. But it happens and it affects these communities, and you need to understand how it has affected the people that are living there historically.
Yeah. It was recently suggested to me that one of the cruelest things you can do is completely shatter somebody's idea of reality. And I think that's what white America is avoiding, because America is purported as the light on the hill, right? We are the example for the world. So if I see these things and like actually see them and understand that every other apartheid system, including World War II Germany, like was built on our legal system. Like our legal system was the basis for that. Like it is the racist system. And seeing that is like, there's a cognitive dissonance that I think will break white Americans. And they're just like, nah, I don't want to look at it. I don't want to believe it.
Yeah. And that Right, goes back to the point earlier about the idea that Black neighborhoods are unsafe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because no one's understanding how we live in our communities. I think a lot about the line between the porch, the front yard, the sidewalk to the street. This whole line is how historically, even from African architecture, Black people live on their porches, right? And how does that extend from generation to generation all the way to the street? So like this whole idea of folks hanging out on the sidewalk or on the corner. Common wrote a whole song about the corner, which I love. It has all of these architectural and design references that people should follow, right? Because historically, that's how hip hop was created. On the corner. This is where, we socialize. This is where we gather. This is where we come to tell story. And white America sees that as, if they're standing on the corner, they must be selling drugs.
They're dealing.
Movies will tell you that.
Right. So, but that's not how we have lived. This is how we live in our spaces. This is how we live in our communities. And they aren't the only ones. I mean, I even had to explain it to my mom one time, about the corner. And she's like, people just always hang out on the corner. Well, that's what we do. That we meet up. If we're not coming to each other's homes, we're hanging out on the corner, talking, shooting the breeze. And that's literally all it is. That is how things in our cultures have been created, hip hop being one of them. It started on the street. And so understanding that, and my thesis in grad school was understanding that and how we have created these spaces just by living in them. And the street corner is one of them. And you have to understand that when you come in and design spaces for neighborhoods, their cultural identity, what is their cultural identity, and how have they used it to live in their spaces?
How many
I think
organizations?
that real quick, just a thing on that, because like the way you just explained that gave me just a really different frame on understanding cultural appropriation.
Yes.
Because it's normally like the surface, like, oh, you're wearing locks, but you're white. Like, it's like, okay, maybe not, but like this is so much deeper.
Oh yeah.
Understanding the design of cultural integration, the architecture, the nuance of language and communication styles and patterns. Taking hip hop and loving the pieces that I love, the beat, the rhythm, the dance, but not understanding the words and the people. That's cultural appropriation. And I just want to call it like that. That just like went off like a
because the white people love rap music, right? It's like, they know all the words and they know, but hip hop is a culture. Hip hop is a cultural identity that as Black people, we needed to be able to survive and to, it came out of housing projects in New York. They needed that storytelling to survive the places they were living. And they started to create these spaces outside of the spaces that they didn't necessarily want to be living in. And so it's an extension of their living spaces and storytelling. So when white people are like, oh, I love this rapper, that's great. You know the words to their songs. But when you talk about hip hop as a culture, that is a cultural identity for Black people. B-boying and MCing and all of these things are the identities of hip hop. And those are the things that I studied in grad school to understand how these things were creating spaces and how can we use these identities to create better spaces when gentrification comes in, and that's what you need to understand. And it can be done for any culture, for Black and brown, anyone, Jewish, whatever the areas where they are living, understanding what their identity is in that space, and what have they created in these spaces? How do they operate? How do they live? And that's what you need to understand when talking about gentrification. You can't just come in and build a Target or build a Starbucks and think that that community is not going to react or that they're going to thrive just because you
because
built a Target.
it makes sense to you somewhere else in all of your other communities. It's like, oh,
Right.
we like this mall or this thing, or
Right.
it's so how many organizations are there like yours?
It's quite a few in LA. So I work for affordable housing developer, and it's quite a few. My organization is a little unique because we're small and we do all of our own work, right? So we manage our properties. We're a service provider. We have a youth build program that that helps transition age youth, that age group 18 to 24, to get their GED or learn a trade. They're able to go through a program to learn a trade. So we're a little unique in our organization because we do it all. We operate all of our buildings. But there are a lot of affordable housing developers doing this work in LA.
But that focus on the education and the community involvement and all that stuff, do they all do that, or is that all unique to you? Or
I want to say it's all unique to us.
Yeah.
So VCH started out as a developer and then for a while wasn't developing. And so they started working on building their relationships in Venice. And so we've always had a strong community foundation. I've only been with VCH for 3 years, but coming in, I could tell that, the neighborhood loved them. They know a lot of people in the neighborhood. And so my role was just to continue that, right? That engagement, talking to the community, talking about design ideas. I do a lot, it's called participatory design, where we actually get feedback from our tenants, from staff, from the community about what they want the design of our buildings to look like. I think that's unique to us. My goal at the end of the day is to create guidelines of how we operate and how we've been doing these things.
So you have fellowships nationwide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we do. We've had fellows in Cleveland, so I'm sure I can reach out to them and they would be happy to talk to you about their work, and if it's any folks that they can connect you with, they would love to do that. This is the same type of work is happening throughout the United States in different areas.
It's one of those things, like for me personally, as I think about, Rodney and I have talked about this a lot, and the very principle of privilege and what does it mean and what can you do with it and how does it play. And I have been privileged to have been raised by generations of financial responsibility, from budgeting to, managing, buying versus renting versus leasing, and having just this foundation of, when I went off to college, as an example, my parents gave me a chunk of money and said, hey, this is going to cover everything that you need, your food, your rent, your utilities, all of that stuff. I'm going to teach you how to do this. And then you got to go out and execute it. And I remember when Rodney and I lived together, like he and I had that conversation. Now, like just generationally and you see it all the time, that there's just opportunity to share information that I've gained through just a different life experience of, in my opinion, my privilege of historical access to information, right? Like that generational access to information is very different community in the Black and white worlds, right?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Like that, so I see that, and like I just feel this pull and obligation to leverage that to give other people the privilege of having the information. Use it or lose it. It doesn't.
Right.
I don't.
And I wish other folks were the same way. So I'm like complete opposite of you. So I'm first generation college. My parents just wanted us to go to school, but had no idea what they were doing. So took out student loans in our name. And after school, at the end of the day, it was a struggle for us, right? No fault to them. They didn't go to school. They didn't understand what those type of doing that, what the implications would be of taking out student loans. They're just like, oh, well, we can get a loan. They can go to school, pay it back when you're done.
Right.
Well, struggling to pay it back after school, like the interest, like all of that is just ridiculous. So having folks like you that want to be able to say, well, hey, that's probably not a good idea. I wish, that my sister and I had that, in our lives to be able to say. And so again, that goes back to teaching people how to do these things correctly, what to do, what not to do. Even if you get a loan, what does that look like? What should you be doing in your 4 years of college to not get out of school and be so far in debt? Those types of things are great to know. So it's all about sharing, like you said, sharing and wanting to do that. Folks have to want to do that. And I think it's not going to happen until racism ends, right? It's just not, because the rich want to stay rich and they want to keep the poor. And it's very problematic until people start to wake up and realize that, it's not just, we can't operate like that any longer. I don't know.
I would be very interested to get in contact. Rodney, I don't know if there was something you had to say.
Agree.
How'd you
No, I mean,
this work? Oh, go ahead.
I will say, like, I talked to my dad about this a lot. Like, it's hard to know what you don't know, and talking about like his family and even the stuff that I've learned about finances and money since college, since talking to you, since talking to my wife and financial advisor and accountant, like things that I have now, learned things that like nobody in my family knows. Mm-hmm. And he's talked about like where my grandparents came from and like, they were just trying to eat. Yeah. They were trying to keep a job. They were trying to keep their kids safe. And they didn't really have time to look into it. They not only didn't have time, they didn't have a resource. They didn't have anybody that was like, hey, consider this, understand this. And so just to add on to agreeing to everything y'all just said. So
how did you get into this work?
My journey's been a little tricky. I've always had this creative mind, right? My parents are not at all in that way, but they ended up putting me in an engineering program. That's how I got to A&T. Was very interested in how things go together. I was good in math, loved science. So ended up in engineering, architectural engineering, because I love to draw. But then realized that I didn't really want to go the engineering route. And so I went into architecture school. So I got my master's. But then after I got my master's and I moved back to Richmond, I started to realize these things right there we're having conversations about. These inequalities in neighborhoods. And Richmond is so historically ran around race, being the capital of the Confederacy and Confederate monuments, and being close to Williamsburg. And it has always been surrounded. Actually, the church that I go to was part of the division of the interstates. I don't know if you all are familiar with these stories, but in a lot of Black neighborhoods, they decided to build these interstates to divide the community. So this is another kind of form of redlining. And so they would build these highways and interstates that basically separated the Black and white neighborhoods. And so I actually attended church that they were trying to tear down to build this interstate, and the church fought it because it was actually built by a slave in the 1800s. So it's historic. But this interstate is right off of my church's right in the backyard. And it separates these two neighborhoods. And so those things started to become interesting to me. And even though in Richmond I was working in construction and maintenance, still doing some architecture and construction work, I was trying to figure out how I could do more community work. So I was on the urban design committee where for the city, where we approved plans and things that were coming up in the city of Richmond, and then decided to apply for this fellowship. So it kind of just, my path went from engineering to architecture, but then I took a hiatus from all of that and was working as an accountant for 3 years. And so it's been kind of seemingly all over the place. But when I got here, I realized that it was all preparing me for this role that I am in now in project management and in community engagement, community-led design. All of that now is working for me in this role. And so yeah, it seemed in the beginning it was a little sporadic, but God had the plan. I was just trying to follow it, even though it was kind of all over the place to me, what it seemed like. And so when I moved back to Richmond, I just kind of got interested in the history of Richmond and wanted to do more community work. So when I found this fellowship, it was perfect for me to be able to figure that out. And like I said, when I was in college and grad school, my thesis was around that and how hip hop is creating these areas of social engagement and how that can create space. And so that kind of kickstarted it a little bit. So yeah.
A question that is not at all related to the previous question, but you mentioned a couple things in there, your church, God, things lining up. I'm gonna ask a question and I'll add context later. Maybe if we get there. What does God mean to you? What is faith? What is God? What does that mean to you in your life?
God means everything. I mean, I grew up in the Baptist church, right? So it was when I was a kid, it was something that we did. And I understood as a child that God was present. My parents showed me that praying, talking to us about, the Bible, making sure we were in Bible study, in the choir, usher board, whatever church was, we were there, right? And so I understood that God had a presence in my life. But as I get older, and as I was getting older, things just started to happen in my life to just struggle, right? You just don't always get to the things that you want. For a little while I was working as an accountant, I was just in a bad place where it was not my career. I didn't go to school for this. I was struggling to figure out my place in architecture. And so God showed up in that time where it was like a low point in my life to bring me up to a place where I had to say, I have to have faith. That's when I had to take faith into my own hands, right? And say for myself, my parents couldn't do it for me anymore. So I think at that point, that's when I realized that I had to take my faith and say, this is what I believe in. I know God is going to work it out. If you just tell me what to do, then I'm going to follow what you're asking me to do. And I'm going to keep moving and keep pushing and keep following until I am at the place where I'm supposed to be. And I think about that every day. Actually, sometimes makes me a little emotional because I'm not even an emotional person. But to be able to have something in yourself and just say, I give it all to you. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know which direction I'm supposed to be going in. I give it all to you for you to work it out. And then you just tell me what I'm supposed to do. I'll follow it. I may not understand it, but I'm going to follow it because I have faith that I'm going to get to where I'm supposed to be. And that's kind of where I am now in LA. If you had asked me 3 years ago, would I be moving across the country? I'd be like, no, you're crazy. I've always been a mover, Virginia, North Carolina, New Jersey. I've moved around, but to be this far from family, I never would have thought that. And that was something that I had to do because God said, this is where you're supposed to be able to push yourself beyond where you think you can be. 3 years ago, I would not have done this, this podcast. We would not be sitting here because I'm an introvert. I'm a shy person. And people tell me all the time, I don't get that from you at all. But in my role,
I get that.
In my role, this is who I have to be. I'm in front of the community. I talk to people all the time. And so I had to move to LA in order to get me to this point. And that was all God. I just said, okay, this is what you're telling me to do. I'm going to put my faith in you and trust you. And I'm going to move and look at all these opportunities. I'm sitting here talking to you guys on a podcast. I never would have, like, what?
My parents couldn't do it for me anymore. That sounds like a really profound statement. Like, so it obviously affected your faith and your relationship with God. Mm-hmm. It sounds like it also affected everything. How you think about work, the opportunities. Yeah. It's kind of like your moment of like, all right, this is me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, when you're a child, right, you think as a child. That's in the Bible. And when you get older, you put away childish things. That also means that you have to put away childish thinking that, oh, my parent is going to pray for me. They're going to fix this situation for me. Well, they can't eventually. And they can pray for you, but they can't force faith on you. You know, they can just say a prayer and hope that you understand God and how he works, but they can't make you do that. And I think even though I was kind of old at that point, I was a little older, way past childish age. But because I think I was at a low point, I realized that no one else was going to be able to help me but myself. And I needed God to help me do that. I was the only one that was going to be able to keep pushing, to keep working, to keep researching and understanding things that I wanted to do. It was only me, so I say all the time, somebody pray for me. I have some praying parents and aunts and uncles. But that's all they can do. That's up to a certain point, and the rest is up to you. And so I had to realize that.
How do you, with a few minutes to go, is probably too big of a question, but I'm gonna try.
Okay.
How do you experience God? This is a question I like to ask a lot.
Man, I'm actually still learning. I'm listening to a pastor every Sunday and trying to do Bible study. I'm still trying to understand. I tell my friends this all the time, that sometimes I don't think I hear God correctly. And I'm still working on being able to separate myself from what God is saying, right? I have to be able to say, it's not my mind. If I'm hearing something, I'm not the one telling me. So I'm actually still working on that. Every single day, my prayer is, Lord, let me hear clearly what you are telling me, and not to put my own self in that. Like, forget my heart, my mind, what my heart, my mind is telling me. I want to hear you clearly. And it is challenging. It definitely is. It's not an easy thing to do, especially when you go through hard times, but just continuing to clear your mind, read the Bible, understanding, what, even if he's trying to tell you something, you may not understand, right, what he's telling you to do. So just reading, going to church. I'm still a work in progress.
Aren't we all?
So I'm still working on that.
Aren't we all?
Appreciate all of that. That's beautiful, and like there's so much in there. But that's really good stuff. It's I think I ask because Keith and I talk about it a lot, trying to understand our relationships with God, universe, energy, everything, people. And then it's such a divisive topic for people. Like somebody will hear the word God, or they'll hear the word church, or they'll hear the word religion, and like they already feel some type of way. And I think apropos to the name of this podcast, there's more in common between how so many people think about these things, even if it's named something different. That I would implore people to like go past just the word that they hear somebody say, like, oh, I heard you say faith. Oh God, I don't do faith in God. It's like, well, maybe you do, but you just do it in your way. And so I really appreciate you sharing that with us, though.
Yeah, it's
no
funny
problem.
because I mean, you said 3 years ago you wouldn't have been able to do a podcast. I don't know. I think
3 years ago we wouldn't have been able to do a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, 2 years ago I wouldn't have been able to ask you that question.
Wow.
I started asking that question when we were in Costa Rica.
Yep.
And that was the first time I had ever asked somebody that question. And their answer, the way I received it, was very much the way I probably would have received it before. I just wasn't as resistant to it. And I
think what was different for you, Keith, was the way you asked it. You had, because it wasn't about sell me on God. It was tell me what God is to you and how you experience it.
Yeah.
And I think just from knowing you for so long, I think that changed how you were able to hear it, because it wasn't about somebody being like, this is what you need to get out of God. This is what I get out of God.
A big part of it for me is over the last year, Rodney got me onto a book. It's called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And he breaks this down in a way that I could understand it. And now I've reached this place where I experience something that I think you would call God, right? And like, so when I love, to Rodney's point, when we say more in common and the resistance to this God and faith and like everything you say and hear, it's like, I totally get it. Like I feel and I experience what you're experiencing with different language, different words, and different thoughts. But at the same time, it's all the same thing. And that's one of the beautiful things I love about having that question and that conversation, because I think there's a lot that we can all take from anybody who is on that spiritual path to understanding their existence and how their existence is impacted. I have to say,
it's amazing that you asked that question, because not a lot of people talk about religion and faith, and so that was awesome. I love that.
So we've got 2 minutes. That would be, to be fair, to just time. We usually don't have a hard stop, but today we do. So we have one final question, and before Rodney asks it, I just want to say thank you. This is
thank you.
It's a different conversation than we've had before, and I think it's
wow.
really, really important and powerful conversation, and I'm super excited to know you and get to know you more, and we'll talk more on that fellowship stuff. But before we get there, Rodney,
absolutely have some things to talk to you about, especially for Venice.
Awesome.
So
please do. I would love to continue these conversations.
Yeah, we're gonna do that. The last question is, now that we're at the end of this and the audience is yours, what would you like to leave them with? What would you like them to think about?
Wow, I think that may be the hardest of all the questions. I think one of the main things is what we've already talked about, is this quote that I like to use in my work, that nothing about us without us is for us. And so I just want the audience to know that it is so important for communities, especially communities of color, to be a part of these processes, and that it's so many biases. We talk a lot about implicit, explicit biases that people have to get over, even within ourselves. With everything that's going on in the world now, I think it's been awakened a lot. Racism has always been there, but it's just been amplified. But now the world is seeing what we have to live in our lives every day, right? And so I just want to encourage everyone to work on themselves, to be able to change these things, these systematic inequalities. Just help to change the system, and to be open to be able to do that work. You have to have an open mind and open communication, having conversations like this, asking questions that you don't know, even if you think it'll offend someone. Let's talk about it. Let's figure this out. It's a lot to figure out, so don't be shy about it. It's going to take a long time, no matter who's in office. We have a lot of work to do. And so, I just want to encourage people and plea to please just do the work. I mean, it could be something. It doesn't even have to be anything big. Even if it's something about you having a conversation with someone of another race that you just don't understand about them, have the conversation. That's helpful in changing the way this country is running. It has to change. We can't. Enough is enough.